Welcome to the Darkstream, VoxDay, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight we are going to talk about something that is both military significant in terms of military history, the 5th generation of modern war, and we're also going to explain what is, in my opinion, an absolutely stunning achievement of artificial intelligence. It's just really amazing. Nibmeister says, "Cool shirt." Yeah, this is the new Castelia Cathedra shirt. It's got the full verbum caro factum est on the back with the big logo. We switched it up. We used to we had the big logo on the front and the small one on the back, and then Castelia Shipping had the bright reason to or bright idea to say, hey, we should flip that around. So let's see. As I like to point out, I am not tech support. I am not UATV tech support. But he says, is there a reason why? I mean, just email. Don't ask me. I don't do this stuff. No. I'm sure there's a very good reason for it. And, you know, the important thing is we've got access. We're making sure that everybody has access until everybody has the ability to pay for subscriptions, that sort of thing. So if there's some kind of anomaly between what it reports and so forth, just shoot them an email, or go on Social Galactic and at them. That's what those things are there for. I'm also not interested in hearing people talk about how they're having a problem with their personal system, because I can't do anything about it. So anyhow. Speaking of Castelia Cathedra, we just announced book number 2, and for the very small number of new subscribers who don't understand that we start making the books after the subscription months are done. We have to do that because we don't know how many we're going to sell. You wouldn't want us to make 300 books and have 500 subscriptions, and on the other hand, you wouldn't want us to make 500 books and only get 300 subscriptions. That's how book publishers get in trouble. So anyhow, the new book is Prayer and the Contemplative Life by Thomas Aquinas, and what it is it's a curated selection of his works from Summa Theologica, a lot of the relevant questions. And there's also some bits from St. Augustine, as well as the author of the main commentator on Summa Theologica. So, it's a great Christian resource. Even if you're not Catholic, it's Christian doctrine that I think is very useful and important to know. So. And it's going to make a great book. It's going to make a really beautiful book. So, anyhow, there's a couple other minor, as long as we're talking about Castelia, let me show you something that we're very, very pleased about. And this is the new beast at the bindery. And this is what's called a clicker, which is kind of a silly little name for a pretty formidable machine. But what it does is it cuts out the leathers. So it has kind of like a cookie cutter thing that goes under the press. So you put the leather down, you put the cookie cutter form on top of it, and then click, it just stamps down and cuts it out perfectly. So this is necessary because, oh, I forgot, I got another picture I can show you. The reason it's necessary, I have to save this somewhere. There we are. The reason that we need that is because of this. And what this is the first mass set of pigskins that have arrived. So so you can see how it comes. It comes kind of like the goat skins. It doesn't come in the neatly pre-cut sets the way that the old cowhide did. And so we needed a way to cut it out. So if you ever wondered, as a backer, what did you do with the stuff that we, with the money from the Iliad and the Odysseys you sold? Well, you're looking at what we did with it. And the really important thing about the clicker is that it's also going to allow us to do the hubbing. And so it's going to allow us to create the hubs in the spine. And that means we're ready to go now. That last piece is what we've been really waiting to figure out how to do properly. And now we appear to have that. I will let you know when we have definite confirmation, which we should have this week, and hopefully be able to show you some good examples of it. The other piece of news that I have to mention is that Vibe Patrol released a single today. I'm not going to play it for you because it's already up here on Unauthorized. You can listen to it in the Voxophonic channel, and but it is on Spotify, it is on Apple Music, iTunes, and it is on YouTube, if you happen to be so inclined. So kind of an experiment. Just wanted to do something that was, see if I could do a song that was just pure candy pop, and I think you'll agree that it turned out pretty well. So if it's not your style of music, no worries, not mine either. But that's the hallmark of a proper professional, is you can do things that are not necessarily what you prefer, right? Now, let's get on to the main event, and that is the 5 generations of modern war. This is a piece that I wrote, generated, whatever, last night. And I think that it was an absolute astonishing accomplishment of artificial intelligence, and a very good example of how organic and how artificial intelligence augments organic intelligence, and it allows you to accomplish things quickly and at a level that you might not be able to achieve quite as quickly on your own. So so what I did was I reminded it, I fed it my transcript of William Lynn's lecture. It already knew it, but just in case, I want to make sure it didn't cheat and invent anything. So what it did is, I said, basically, based on this structure and based on the idea that the modern drone warfare of the type that we've seen in the Ukraine, in Israel and Iran, and prior to that in the Azerbaijan-Armenian war, generate the use the 4 generations as a model, and then explicate the 5th generation, and make a specific note of the unique way that this new type of warfare affects what used to be the logistics zone, and basically transforms the logistics zone into a combat zone. You know, for all of history, the logistics zone has been essentially safe. You know, only with the advent of air power was it even possible to attempt to interdict the logistics zone. Obviously, the strategic bombing campaign of the 8th Air Army and the British Air Force was an attempt to utilize that, and it was an absolutely unsuccessful attempt. You know, the not only was production not even inhibited, production increased despite the strategic bombing effort. And it had absolutely nothing to do, it really didn't interdict any troop movements or any logistics. West by Godbear says, it was a great piece. I sent it to a USMC logistics officer friend, still waiting on him to read it. I'd be very interested in hearing what he says. You know, I suspect, based on what I've read in various publications. Now, obviously, I don't keep up on the professional military publications. You know, I occasionally read pieces by them. But what I've read and what I've heard discussed and that sort of thing, I don't believe that there's any discussion, any public discussion going on in any of the Western militaries that rises to the level of this particular piece yet. And so, anyhow, the 5th generation of modern war, drones, attrition, and the collapse of the logistics sanctuary. A lecture examining how unmanned systems fundamentally transform the nature of warfare by eliminating the distinction between the front lines and the logistics space. Now, I could read this to you, but it's pretty long. I'm going to assume, unless you guys say otherwise, I'm going to assume that you just want me to sort of summarize and skip through it. So anyhow, the introduction talks specifically about how it's building upon the framework that William S. Lind laid out in his lecture, 4 Generations of Modern War, which we've published. It's also available as an audiobook. It's actually here on Unauthorized. You can actually listen to the real lecture that he gave. So we have to step outside our current military thinking and also outside the framework of the earlier ways of thinking of war in order to understand what's been happening in these new conflicts. The first major one where people began to notice something was different was the Nagorno-Karabakh War, which was between Azerbaijan and Armenia, Ukraine, and then Israel and Iran. So my contention is that we are witnessing the emergence of the 5th generation of modern war, and like each previous generational shift, it represents a qualitative change. It's not just an evolution in tactics, it's not just an evolution in technology, but it's a fundamental transformation in the way that warfare exists. And so it's being driven by drones, which have accomplished something that is unprecedented since Westphalia. It's eliminated the sanctuary of the logistics space. I mean, this is absolutely astonishing. For the first time since modern warfare began, there is no safe rear area. Think about all of the movies about the U.S. troops in Iraq. You know, think about how, or you know, even going back to Korea and the Vietnam War. You know, they always show this difficult juxtaposition of how 1 minute they're on the front lines, and then, you know, an hour later they're chasing hookers at you know, dive bars. You know, and it's supposed to be this real head case thing and really mess you up. Well, that doesn't mess you up half as much as not having any safe space to go. You know, yeah, being behind enemy lines takes on a new meaning. anyhow, the combat zone has expanded from what was traditionally a 5-kilometer depth, which was essentially the range of the biggest mortars. That's how far the artillery could reach. Obviously it wasn't necessarily very accurate, but that's when you kind of knew you were in the combat zone, when you came within 5 kilometers of the front lines. But now it's expanded it to 25 kilometers or more. And it's not just the artillery being able to hit farther. It's not about special forces going behind the enemy lines. It's a permanent, persistent threat of attack against all the elements of the military. They talk about the point of the spear, right? The tip of the spear. And the tip of the spear, and then the whole majority of the military that is required to support it, right? Well, the transformation, and the reason that this is worthy of being named a new generation of war, and there have been a lot of attempts to do that. You had all kinds of people. I think I've seen things all the way up to, well, we're actually in the 7th generation of war, blah, blah, blah. And all it is people trying to make a name for themselves. It's just people trying to, imitate William Lind and to a lesser extent Martin Van Creveld, and make a name for themselves so that they can sell some books and go on the lecture circuit. But all the stuff they've talked about has basically been nonsense, because none of the things that they talked about were ever transformational. Not in the way that the previous generations were. And so drone warfare, however, is definitely transformational to that point. So then this just is a quick summary of the 4 generations. I'll repeat them just so everybody has it in their head. The first generation, 1648 to the 1860s, the warfare of line and column, exemplified by Frederick the Great and Napoleon, and of course, my personal favorite, the great English general, the Duke of Wellington. This was warfare of order, linear tactics, imposed discipline, and centralized control. The culture was inward focused, hierarchical, and demanded obedience over initiative. Exactly. Basically, they were trained to just stand there and take it, or to march forward and take it. You weren't even supposed to try to get out of the way. It was madness in some ways. But and the whole nature of war then was very, very simple and arithmetic. How fast can you fire? That whole debate of line versus column, the English line versus the French column, came down to math. And the reason that the English were so effective is because they were so well drilled in rapidly reloading their weapons that they were able to, and the line spread out, whereas the column, most of the column couldn't even shoot. And so it all came down to very simple math. Second generation, 1914 to 1940. That's not actually true. It's basically 1914 to the present. Honestly, the U.S. military is still basically a second generation military. Born from the catastrophe of 1914, when the old tactics met modern firepower. Basically, you can't do column and line when there's rapid firing guns. You needed something else, and what that something else was primarily was artillery. The French solution was bataille conduite, coordinated battle dominated by indirect artillery fire. The artillery conquers, the infantry occupies. So basically you bomb the hell out of them with artillery until they're all, essentially combat ineffective, and then you have the infantry charge and take the ground. This preserved the culture of order while adapting to industrial age lethality. And notice that what caused the change? What caused the change was the industrial age lethality. That's the key. Third generation, 1918 to present, and this is where this is what they call maneuver warfare. And the German response to the same problem took a radically different path. Beginning with Scharnhorst reforms after Jena, the Prussian-German army developed an outward-focused culture that prized initiative over obedience, results over methods. This culminated in the Bewegungskrieg of 1940, which shattered the second-generation French army in 6 weeks. This is true. On the other hand, it didn't hold up very well against the second-generation Soviet forces, because the Soviets were able to mass sufficient force so that maneuver didn't really matter very much. Fourth generation, 1945 to present, the end of the state's monopoly on war. Non-state actors fighting for non-political goals using asymmetric methods that bypass state militaries to attack the societies they defend. This represents the end of the modern era and a return to the pre-Westphalian world where many different entities fight wars. Now, that hasn't really proved out quite as much as we might have thought even 5 years ago. For example, we've seen in the Ukraine that the non-state actors, or the separatists in the Novorossian republics, were unable to achieve their goals, and so they turned to the Russian army, and there you go, right? Now we face something new, something that transcends even the fourth generation. And it really does, because even though we're talking about this in the context of fourth generation war or post fourth generation war, I'm sorry, let me back up. We're talking about this mostly in a concept of nation states. There's no reason for drone warfare to be limited to nation states. Corporations are perfectly capable of engaging in this. I think that you're going to see a lot more. Well, I mean, what am I saying? We've already seen assassinations and decapitation strikes based on the use of drones inside a country. Now, granted, it was Israeli agents. It was essentially, it was Mossad. So I don't know if they're technically considered Israeli military or military intelligence or what. But the point is that they were actually acting inside the country in a non-military context, but obviously taking military action. We saw the same thing, in fact, in Russia with the truck attacks, where they had the drones inside the trucks, and then the drones flew at the top of the truck, right? In both cases, there was a nation-state military behind it, but there didn't have to be. So the emergence of the fifth generation, the logistics revolution. So we have to understand what has remained constant through all the previous generations, the sanctity of the logistics space. In every generation from Westphalia to yesterday, there existed a clear distinction between the front, where combat occurred, and the rear, where supplies were gathered, organized, and moved forward to sustain combat operations. This distinction was fundamental. The tooth-to-tail ratio became a basic metric of military efficiency. As much as 98% can be technically rear versus the point of the spear, as it were. No matter what happens with the front, it might shift, advance, or retreat, but the rear area remained relatively secure. Yes, there were exceptions: strategic bombing campaigns, special operations raid, partisan warfare, but these were extraordinary measures, and frankly, they didn't tend to accomplish much. No significant military objectives were ever accomplished by commandos, right? And so, let's see here. Call Me Cordell says, I'd assume 5GW is the form of warfare laid out in unrestricted warfare by those two kernels. No, because that's not about the battlefield. What Lind is talking about here is he's specifically talking about the war as it's fought on the battlefield. He's not talking about all aspects of it. You know, strategic bombing does not factor into the 4 generations of war. You know, in the same way, because it's about modern war, the Greek hoplite warfare or the Roman legion way of war was not factored into it either. You know, this is not the context is not everything to do with the war. It's about how war is fought on the modern battlefield. And unrestricted warfare, I mean, it means what it says. Unrestricted. Basically, they're saying we are going to fight on all fronts: economic, financial, health, etc. You know, I mean, for example, in that context, the new divorce laws that China passed in April is actually probably part of their asymmetric warfare with the West. They know how the destruction of the family and the declining birth rates are weakening those societies and those militaries, right? And so they're actually taking active steps to strengthen the Chinese society on the basis of what they see weakening the Western societies. Enter the drone, ... These systems have accomplished something unprecedented. They've made the logistics space as dangerous, or as we've recently found out, even more dangerous than the front line. A $500 drone can destroy a $5 million tank. A swarm of 1,000 drones can shut down an airfield that costs billions to build. Most importantly, these threats are persistent, pervasive, and no longer require the massive resources that previously characterized deep strike capabilities, in other words, strategic bombing, cruise missiles, etc. The implications are staggering. For the first time since modern warfare began, there is no safe space on the battlefield. Every vehicle, every building, every concentration of personal or equipment is potentially under immediate threat of attack. The combat zone has expanded from a narrow band of direct fire engagement to encompass everything within drone range, and that range is expanding rapidly. This is not evolution, this is revolution. We are witnessing the birth of the 5th generation of modern war. You know, it was really striking and a little bit awful to see about 6 weeks ago, I think it was, there was a troop carrier, a Ukrainian troop carrier, and it was in the middle of a city. I mean, miles and miles away from the front lines. And you know, they thought they were safe. You know, they were just being transported from, you know, one barracks to another or something like that. And, you know, you can, the drones have cameras on them, of course, so you could see the drone flying around, and you could see that the back door on the armored vehicle had just opened up, and the first guys were just beginning to step down. And then, you know, the drone just accelerates towards them, and then everything goes black. You know, and, you know, that was really demoralizing to the Ukrainian forces, because to actually see the video of at least a dozen of their soldiers being taken out by a single drone strike 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers, whatever it was, away from the front lines was just devastating, and legitimately so. But that's now part of war, which didn't used to be the case. So the first study, I'm not going to bore you with the details here. The first story talks about the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war, and I'm just going to mention that basically the Armenian military was very traditional, very classic, and whereas they had trenches and all this kind of stuff dug. Azerbaijan had invested heavily in drones, and I remember seeing a video It was the first time I'd really ever seen these drones being used, and you could see them. You could see the Armenian soldiers in the trenches, and then all of a sudden they start pointing up, and then you see guys start to run. Some of them are like jumping out of the trench, others are like shooting up at it, and just the level of panic that happened. And that's when I realized, holy cow, these things are like hand grenades, only they can be thrown almost indefinitely far. And I remember thinking at the time, I might have even done a post about it, but I remember thinking at the time, wow, this is going to change everything. I had no idea it was going to change so much so fast, but I do recall specifically thinking something's different about this war. And it was such a short war too that, I mean, it was literally a matter of weeks that, you didn't, it was easy to just go, oh, well, okay, that was an interesting anomaly. But the Azerbaijanis did win. It says, most importantly, Azerbaijan understood that fifth generation warfare is not about platforms, but about networks. Individual drones could be shot down, but the network of surveillance and strike capabilities remained intact. They had created what military theorists now call a system of systems, a distributed network that could lose individual nodes while maintaining overall capability. And then we get into the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Now here it was kind of interesting because this is where the AI really screwed up. And this is something that you need to be very careful about when you're using AI, is that you have to actually read the stuff. You can't just crank it out and then assume it's fine. You need to read everything as carefully as if you had written it by hand and you're going over it to edit it. What you're looking for is not the typos and the grammatical errors. What you're looking for is the adverse effects of the narrative. So what was interesting and totally wrong was that because the media sources are so erroneous and so pro-Ukraine, this whole section in case study 2 was talking about the Ukrainian drone successes and how hard it was on the Russians, which was crazy because, I mean, while that was true initially, Russia managed to completely turn it around, and it's now the Russians who have the big advantage in the drone war. It's now the Russians who are causing massive casualties, and in fact, drones cause about half of all the casualties now. Well, what's interesting is that 65% of the Ukrainian casualties caused by drones are in the logistical space. So the logistical space is twice as dangerous in terms of drones as the combat zone. Because in the combat zone, you're keeping your head down, you're staying out of sight, you've probably got some fortifications, you're moving around carefully and slowly. You're a lot harder to detect. That's not true in the logistical zone, right? So what I did is I said, no, that's not right. Rewrite it and take into account these casualties, these statistics, and the impact of Russia's industrial advantage. And it really incorporated it well. It didn't just get rid of the stuff. It pointed out that how Russia had adapted. One of the startling things for me as an American to witness is that for generations and for decades, Americans have thought, well, our advantage is that we're more flexible. Our advantage is that we can quickly change what we're doing, and we're more creative and all that sort of stuff. And we tend to think of the Russians as being just, very set in their ways, unable to change, and so forth. But actually, Russia, and before them, the Soviet Union, have demonstrated a remarkable capacity for rapid change. Russia's response over the subsequent 2 years demonstrates the critical importance of industrial capacity in fifth-generation warfare. Unlike previous generations, where victory went to the side that could get there first with the most, fifth-generation warfare ultimately favors the side that can produce and deploy drone systems faster than the enemy can destroy them. Fifth-generation war favors the side that can outlast the other in a constant battle of attrition. So you can see this is where it's starting to address the Iran-Iraq conflict, which was interesting because that's not actually a traditional battlefield conflict, and yet the same principles apply with regards to the principle or the importance of industrial capacity in a battle of attrition. So anyhow, it talks about the early wars, or the early part of the war, why Ukraine had the advantage, and then it brings in the industrial dimension of fifth-generation warfare, which again is very, very different than fourth-generation warfare. And it says, most critically, the Russians developed the industrial capacity to treat drones as expendable resources rather than precious assets. The industrial approach has yielded devastating results. By 2024, Russia was deploying what military analysts call drone swarms. Coordinated attacks involving hundreds of unmanned systems launched simultaneously. Ukrainian air defenses designed to handle dozens of targets found themselves overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Yeah, apparently just last week, they launched an attack with 577 simultaneous drones. That's not even possible to think about shooting those things down yet. The collapse of Ukraine's logistics sanctuary. The most telling indicator, this is that 65% of Ukrainian casualties now occur between 5 and 20 kilometers from the front lines. This represents the complete collapse of the logistics sanctuary. Ukrainian supply convoys, maintenance facilities, command posts, and troop concentrations find themselves under constant attack by Russian drone systems. Areas that were relatively secure in 2022 have become as dangerous as the front lines themselves. Then it gets into the adaptation cycle, strategic implications, and then this got into the Iran-Israel exchange. I don't think, to be honest, I mean, remember, this is an AI written piece. I don't think that this is actually directly relevant. I mean, we're talking about this is really a strategic battle, but what's interesting is that the same principles are proving to apply. So, you know, maybe the whole thing is more revolutionary than we think. Anyhow, it talks about how the transition to fifth generation warfare is going to be very, very difficult for the militaries of the world. It requires a fundamental cultural transformation within military organizations. The current military setup in the United States is basically built up around funding. You know, every state and every congressman lobbies for a piece of the pie, and the pie is divided adroitly by the military contractors. You know, nothing is efficient. Everything's ridiculously expensive. And this is exactly hopeless. It's totally wrong for fifth generation warfare. The organizational challenge is even more significant now than it was back when Lind and others were saying that they needed a revolution in military procurement. Now it's absolutely necessary. In fact, if the U.S. military cannot give up its culture of funding, the U.S. military will become irrelevant. I'll go so far as to say that. You know, the problem is that, you know, Lockheed Martin does not want to bid on producing hundreds of thousands of drones. They really like the business of, we'll make 50 jet fighters that take 15 years to make and cost tens of hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't think that the US military contractors are capable of making the switch. I really don't. Then let's see here, the problem of command and control, strategic implications. Anyhow, this is just then it gets into the enemies of 5th generation warfare, and of course the greatest enemy of the transformation is the bureaucratic instinct to control and systematize everything. Military bureaucracies naturally seek to reduce the chaos and uncertainty through procedures, regulations, and standardization. That's not going to work. It just flat out won't work. Traditional military thinking is organized around platforms, tank ships, aircrafts, and so forth. But 5th generation warfare is not about platforms, but networks and capabilities that can be rapidly configured. The platform, this is what I was talking about before. The platform mentality leads to exactly the wrong kinds of investments. Expensive, sophisticated platforms are targets for cheap drone swarms. This represents a fundamental challenge to defense industries that have organized themselves around producing small numbers of expensive platforms. The economics of 5th generation warfare favor mass productions of simple systems that can be rapidly customized over a bespoke production of complex ones. So, 5th generation warfare is going to require new everything, and that's why it is a new generation. It's going to require new military doctrines. It's going to require new forms of military contracting. It's going to require new procurement systems. It's going to be radically different. And AI, asymmetry, etc., etc. This is all just like, call to action boilerplate, blah, blah, blah. But, I do encourage you to read the whole thing. And I do think that it's also important for you to remember that is what AI augmented writing looks like. We're already in the future. If you have a coherent concept in mind, which I did, I had a coherent thesis in mind that the advent of cheap drone warfare and the industrial capacity elements behind it were so significant that it merited the title of the 5th generation of modern war. Because I had the thesis, then it was easy for the AI to boom, 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 gather the kind of data and pull in the kind of research in seconds that would have taken me days, if not weeks, just to get the relevant data. And so that is an example of how you can profitably use AI to augment your own intelligence, to augment your own abilities, and produce something that is both useful and significant. Now, obviously, if I was going to publish that, if I was going to submit that paper for publication in a military review or something, I would significantly modify it. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be a little tightened up, references that need to be checked. I would also add a section on how it can be defended against. The only way I think that drones can really be defended against effectively, there's really two possibilities. One is anti-drones, drone hunting drones. That's one thing. But much more effective and much more necessary, I think, is the drone equivalent of the manpad. The manpad, the man-portable anti-aircraft rocket, really put the brakes on air power, whether it was helicopters or jets. That was the main thing that the U.S. provided the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and really helped prevent the Soviets from being able to achieve what they wanted to achieve, is that they sent them lots and lots of manpads. Well, there's not much that they're going to be able to do about the drones until every soldier is armed with a target enhanced laser that's powerful enough to knock the drone down. And I suspect that is probably the single most important development priority for the Russian military right now. And it should be the single most important development for the US military. I haven't heard that it is. I know that there are a number of military contractors and would-be military contractors working on different things relating to shotguns and body armor and other elements involved in anti-drone warfare. But ultimately, I think that just because of this, the drones are only going to get faster and smaller and more difficult to stop. So you're going to need something that is faster than a drone, and obviously nothing is faster than the speed of light. Do they have silent stealth drones yet? I don't think they have them yet, but I think that they're obviously coming. And they will be coming, no question. And so, and then of course you get into the whole, drones at night. How do you knock them down? How does the soldier with a laser knock them down at night, right? Because with their ability to use infrared and that sort of thing, and other forms of light technology, you're not going to hide from them. So, they're going to need some kind of the ideal weapon. The laser is going to need something that allows them to see it. So it's kind of crazy that for years we've been thinking that all the stormtroopers and all the laser weapons of science fiction were absurd and pointless, right? Like, what's the advantage really, other than possibly not needing ammunition? Well, now we know. Now we know. Anyhow, that's all I've got for tonight. Thanks for tuning in. If you find it interesting, I would encourage you to go ahead and pass that on to your military contacts and see what they make of it. See what they think of it. I would welcome suggestions for improvements, any criticisms, etc., etc. So, Skydog says there are fan types that dramatically reduce the drone sound, but it's not in wide use yet, and it's not exactly silent either. So that's all I have. If you haven't signed up yet for the new payment system, please do so. We want to get everybody resubscribing. We're rebuilding this thing from scratch again. So, but we're going to get there, and it's going to just keep getting better. I'm Vox Day. This is the Darkstream.